Sometimes in life, you get one chance. One phone call that changes everything. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is say no. Sammy Davis Jr. was holding the phone that would destroy his dreams forever. On the other end, his agent was screaming about a guaranteed Oscar, the golden statue every entertainer spends their life chasing. But when Sammy looked across the room and saw Maria Rodriguez trying to dance in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, something inside him broke. What he did next would cost him everything he'd worked for. But it would prove that some things matter more than gold. March 15th, 1969, Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood. 2:47 p.m. The call that would haunt Sammy Davis Jr. for the rest of his life. But what Sammy didn't know was that this moment had been building for months, ever since the night he made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. To understand why this phone call nearly killed him, you need to understand what Hollywood was in 1969. It wasn't the place we know today. It was a machine that devoured souls and spit out broken dreams. If you were black, female, or disabled, you weren't just unwelcome. You were invisible. Maria Rodriguez had defied every rule. She was 19, Mexican-American, and the most gifted dancer anyone had seen in a generation. When she moved, gravity forgot its own laws. When she danced, even the coldest studio executives found themselves holding their breath. She was going to be the first Latina lead in a major studio picture, the breakthrough that would change everything for performers who looked like her. The wall was finally coming down. Then came October 12th, 1968, a routine rehearsal, a lighting rig that wasn't properly secured, 200 pounds of steel falling like a judgment from heaven. Maria Rodriguez, who had spent her life defying gravity, was crushed beneath the weight of a world that suddenly remembered its rules. The doctors spoke in whispers. Never walk again. The studio spoke in contracts. Never work again. Everyone spoke in finalities. Accept reality and move on. Everyone except the one-eyed entertainer who knew what it meant to be counted out. Sammy Davis Jr. had been watching Maria's career from the shadows, not because he had to, but because he saw himself in her hunger. 20 years earlier, he'd been the kid who wasn't supposed to make it, the black entertainer with one eye who was told to know his place. But someone had believed in him. Frank Sinatra had opened doors when everyone else slammed them shut. Dean Martin had made room at the table when others said there was no chair for him. They'd taken a risk on a broken kid from Harlem who shouldn't have succeeded. Now it was his turn to be that someone. When Maria's accident happened, Sammy didn't send flowers. He showed up. He sat in that sterile hospital room for hours, not talking, not performing, just being present. When the world wrote her off, Sammy was writing a different story. He converted the back room of his house into a rehearsal studio, not for himself, for her. Because Maria couldn't walk, but she could still create. She could still choreograph. She could still teach the world how to move with grace. But dreams don't pay for medical bills. And Maria's family was drowning in debt. That's when Sammy made his promise. Quietly, without cameras or press releases, he would take care of everything. The therapy, the equipment, the mortgage, whatever it took to keep her dream alive. For 5 months, he'd been keeping that promise, paying bills in secret, supporting a family that had nothing to do with his career or his image, just because it was right. But promises have prices. And on March 15, 1969, the bill came due. The phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. Sammy was watching Maria work through a routine, adapting her choreography to the wheelchair, when his agent's voice shattered the silence. "Sammy, this is it. The call we've been waiting for your entire career." Cy Marsh was screaming so loud that Maria could hear every word from across the room. She saw the expression change on Sammy's face. She saw him turn away from her, as if he were trying to protect her from whatever was coming. "Calm down, Cy. What's happening?" "Golden Boy. Columbia Pictures wants you for Golden Boy. Not just Broadway, Sammy, the movie. They're offering you the lead in a major studio picture." Sammy felt the world stop spinning. Golden Boy was the role that had made him famous on stage. But Hollywood had always been different. Hollywood had always found reasons why a one-eyed black entertainer couldn't carry a major motion picture. Until now. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Major budget. Academy Award campaign. Sammy, they're guaranteeing you an Oscar nomination. Not hoping, not trying. Guaranteeing." The words hit him like lightning. An Oscar. The validation every entertainer dreams of. proof that talent could triumph over prejudice, evidence that a kid from Harlem could stand among the giants. What's the catch? No catch. Just one small thing. They need you in New York next week for fittings and script meetings. Then filming starts immediately. For the next 6 months, you're theirs. Exclusively. Exclusively. The word echoed in the studio like a death sentence. Sammy looked across the room at Maria. She was still working, still believing that her showcase, the one he'd promised to help her with, would happen in 4 weeks. The showcase that would prove she could still contribute to the industry, even from a wheelchair. The showcase that was scheduled to happen right in the middle of his Oscar campaign. Sammy, you there? I'm here. So what do you say? Should I tell them yes? That's when Sammy's past came flooding back. Every door that had been slammed in his face, every time he'd been told he wasn't good enough, wasn't right for the part, wasn't what audiences wanted to see, every night he'd gone to bed wondering if he'd ever get a real chance to prove himself. And then he thought about the promise. Not the contract or the business deal, but the human promise. The moment when he'd looked Maria in the eyes and told her she wasn't forgotten. Sigh. When they say exclusively, what exactly does that mean? It means you're theirs, Sammy. No other projects, no side commitments, nothing that might interfere with the film. What about personal commitments? Personal commitments? Sammy, this is your Oscar. Nothing is more important than that. Sammy closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see the Oscar ceremony. He could hear his name being called. He could feel the weight of the golden statue in his hands, vindication made tangible. But when he opened his eyes, he saw Maria, still practicing, still believing, still trusting that he would keep his word. Sigh, what if I had a prior commitment, something I couldn't break? The line went quiet for a moment. When Sigh spoke again, his voice had changed. Sammy, what aren't you telling me? What's going on? Sammy walked to the window and looked out at Hollywood. Somewhere in those hills, executives were probably already planning his Oscar campaign, designing posters with his face, calculating box office projections. Sigh, I need to think about this. Think about what? Sammy, this is Columbia Pictures. This is your shot at history. If you don't say yes right now, they're going to Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier, the only other black actor who could carry a major studio picture. Sammy's friend, but also his competition. If Sidney took this role, Sammy might never get another chance. How long do I have? They need an answer in 1 hour. I've got them on the other line. 1 hour. 60 minutes to choose between his dreams and his promises. Sigh, tell them I need time. Sammy? 1 hour, Sigh, that's all I need. He hung up the phone and turned back to Maria. She had stopped practicing and was looking at him with concern. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Sammy wanted to tell her. About the movie, about the Oscar, about the choice that was tearing him apart. But instead, he just smiled. Everything's fine. How's the routine coming along? Maria's face lit up. Good. Really good. I think we can make this work, Sammy. I think people will understand that dance isn't just about walking. I know they will. The showcase is going to change everything, isn't it? For people like me? Sammy felt something break inside his chest. Yeah, honey, it's going to change everything. That's when the weight of the moment hit him. This wasn't just about money or scheduling conflicts. This was about what kind of man he wanted to be. 25 years earlier, when he was just starting out, he'd made a promise to himself. If he ever made it, if he ever got to a place where he could help other people achieve their dreams, he would do it, even if it cost him his own. He'd forgotten that promise in the bright lights of success, but Maria had reminded him what it felt like to be broken and still believe in tomorrow. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Sigh called 17 times in the next hour, each time more desperate, each time painting a darker picture of what would happen if Sammy said no. They're getting impatient. Sidney's people are making calls. This is your last chance, Sammy. But with each call, Sammy became more certain of what he had to do. Because sometimes the most important moments in life happen quietly, without cameras or audiences. Sometimes the choice that defines you is the one that nobody else will ever understand. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Sammy picked up the phone for the last time. Sigh, tell me you're calling with good news. I'm calling to tell you no. Silence. I'm sorry, what did you say? I said no, Cy, I'm not taking the role. Sammy, you can't be serious. I'm out. And then Sammy hung up the phone. Maria stared at him from across the room. She'd heard enough to understand what had just happened. Sammy, what did you just do? I made a choice. You can't throw away your career for me. I'm not throwing away my career. I'm choosing what matters. But this was your Oscar, your chance to make history. No, Maria. This is my chance to make history, right here, right now, with you. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Sammy unplugged it. For the next 3 hours, they worked together on the showcase routine. No interruptions, no regrets, just two artists creating something beautiful from the wreckage of broken dreams. The showcase happened 4 weeks later. It was everything Sammy had promised it would be and more. Maria's choreography redefined what dance could be. It changed how audiences thought about disability. It proved that broken bodies could house unbroken spirits. When the curtain came down, the standing ovation lasted for 8 minutes. Maria Rodriguez never did get her starring role back, but she founded a dance company for performers with disabilities that still exist today. She changed an industry. She opened doors. She proved that different didn't mean less. And Sammy never did get his Oscar. Golden Boy went to Sidney Poitier, who won the Academy Award for Best Actor. But years later, when people asked Sammy if he regretted his choice, he would point to a photograph on his dressing room mirror. The photograph showed Maria surrounded by dozens of dancers, some in wheelchairs, some standing, all reaching toward the sky. You know what? He would say. I got something better than an Oscar. I got to keep a promise. Sometimes the greatest performance of your life isn't the one that wins awards. Sometimes it's the one that saves a soul. That's the real story of the day Sammy Davis Jr. gave up his Oscar chance for a paralyzed dancer. It's not a story about loss. It's a story about what we find when we choose love over legacy. Maria's story didn't end. Sammy gave up his Oscar to help a dancer. He achieved something no Oscar could give. He'd proven fearlessness isn't about risks for yourself, it's about others. Hollywood called him brave, but that's not where this story ends. Sometimes, when you choose to save someone else's dream, you discover your own dream was never about what you thought. 3 months later, Sammy received a letter that changed how he understood success. It was from a 12-year-old girl named Angela Martinez, born with cerebral palsy. Dear Mr. Davis, the letter began, I saw Miss Maria's show on the news. I want to be a dancer too. My mom says I can't because of my legs, but Miss Maria showed me that dancing isn't just about legs. It's about heart. Thank you for showing the world that different doesn't mean broken. Sammy read that letter 17 times. Each time, he understood more about what he'd actually accomplished by saying no to Columbia Pictures. He hadn't just saved Maria's showcase. He'd given a 12-year-old girl permission to dream. Over the next year, Sammy received hundreds of similar letters, from parents of disabled children, from adults who'd been told they weren't good enough, from people who'd seen Maria's story and realized they weren't alone. Each letter was proof that his no to Hollywood had been a yes to something far more important. Here's what Sammy learned. Oscar nominations last one night, box office numbers fade, but changing someone's life? That echoes forever. The irony wasn't lost on the entertainment industry. Sammy Davis Jr., who'd spent his career chasing mainstream acceptance, had found his greatest triumph by walking away from it. Frank Sinatra called weeks after the showcase. You know what you are, Sam? You're a saint. Come on, Frank. I'm serious. Most of us spend our lives trying to get somewhere. You spent yours figuring out what was worth staying for. Dean Martin sent a telegram Sammy kept forever. Heard what you did. Proud to call you friend. Real courage isn't about what you win. It's about what you're willing to lose. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Sidney Poitier himself. Sidney, who had won the Oscar that should have been Sammy's, called personally. I heard what you gave up, Sidney said. That was supposed to be your moment. No, Sammy replied. That was my moment. When I said no. Do you regret it? Sammy thought about the question. He thought about the statue on Sidney's mantelpiece, the interviews he'd never given, the validation he'd never received. Then he thought about Maria, teaching disabled dancers that their chairs weren't cages, but platforms for flying. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. I learned something that night. Sometimes what you think you want most isn't what you need most. What do you mean? I thought I needed an Oscar to prove I belonged. But what I really needed was to prove I could put someone else's belonging ahead of my own. Years later, when Sammy gave a commencement speech at a performing arts school, he ended with these words. Everyone here will face a moment when you choose between your dream and someone else's dignity, between your success and someone else's hope. When that moment comes, and it will, remember that the greatest performances happen not on stage, but in quiet moments when nobody's watching. That's when you discover who you really are. Not when accepting an award, but when making a choice no one will ever applaud. And sometimes, he concluded, sometimes that's when you give the performance of a lifetime. The audience sat in silence. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. The entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding his brave choice. They understood true fearlessness isn't about taking risks for yourself. It's about taking risks for them.